The Affinity Towers received their first 10-floor extension last week, on July 1st, so naturally, we're going to clear them all on auto. The main change for these sets of floors is that the stat debuff for off-attribute units now excludes speed, effectively sealing off the previous Vanguard aka Initiative strats. The side effect of this is the unsealing of off-attribute support units. They'll be defensively quite squishy, but otherwise functional, just don't get hit. These clears aren't meant to be practical or efficient, so if you're looking for steps to follow, this isn't that. But I'll cover each of the floor patterns briefly, and you can look at the setups for references on the required power. /21 opens with the most basic pattern, a lone boss ghost. The catch is that it also has initiative with priority, preempting your party no matter what, turntables and all that. That doesn't really matter with how weak it is. And Academy Rorona setting the panel for Val just cuts a few turns of waiting for the default burst panel. The auto AI does correctly target /Rorona's crit buff now, so it won't default to the next unit on the timeline, and works fine with the other Rorona. I didn't record the setup, a lot of different things should work. For some major whiplash, we're jumping immediately to one of the hardest, or at least highest requirement floors, the item damage floor. The floor effect cuts attack damage by 90%, forcing you to use items which get a plus 10x damage boost, have unlimited uses, and have triple the usual cooldown recovery per turn. The enemies attack primarily with AoEs, both magic and fizz, and the damage is significant even with 3 copies of all target defense V. But the slash version isn't bad, carried by Patty's sustain and additional gauge recovery, and with S. Riza's debuffs amplifying the damage. Slash is also one of the attributes with access to high damage single-use AoE attack items in the kunai, and with the use limit removed, spamming them cuts through enemy HP much faster than normal items. If you're playing this manually, it should be much easier, with S1 to navigate panels or get faster item uses relative to enemy turns. But when it comes to auto, the main consideration is burst panels, since the AI still prioritizes burst over items, and Patty bursting means she isn't refreshing her counter and damage reduction. So ideally, we'd sequence our timeline to avoid that. Slash not having a healer with AoE S2, we also want to aim for Rorona bursts for the party heal. Otherwise, it just comes down to making good attack items. So in other words, this floor will likely gate your progress in most towers as you go through the suffering that is usable item crafting. The devil gains 3-hit invincibility after falling below a certain HP, which on auto can translate into an entire round worth of items being nullified.
お菓子がないならただのいたずらではありませんよ。これも錬金術のなせる技です。
この動き見切れるかしら。みんな思いっきりいくよ。素敵な時間にするよ。ここが見どころです。
縁が
綺麗ですよね。
一斉に仕掛けましょう。これは強力ですね。
うまくいきましたね。これを使うわ。
負けていられません。あっと言わせるのもお手の物です。
GG. Item damage is based on your overall party stats and generally isn't affected by gear or traits, but in this case, the floor effect counts as a received buff, so layered velvet would boost your thrower's item damage. Other than that, the focus is on all target defense, to survive and stall for item cooldowns. We have Rorona for AoE heal on burst, Ryza for debuffs, Patty for sustain, Halloween Prof for damage reduction. Flock was supposed to be for the stat boost, leader skill, and heals, but I underestimated how fragile she'd be and she died early. /23 is the new take on the no-buff floor, with an added bonus of triple the item gauge recovery, like in the previous floor. The knight only takes damage with at least 4 debuffs on it, and one of the ads will clear all debuffs from it, so we need to tag it with either items or Slashbreaker equip effects between that and our main attacks. If you're not familiar with my Firis Initiative setup, it's linked in the description, but the short version is that it uses 275 weight characters in Bride Azana's initiative group to make certain turn ordering work on full auto. The original used Firis because bias, but Judy is more useful for tower, since she has taunt and can get an evade stack up ahead of any hits. We'll be using it either for an Academy Rorona burst panel setup, or to position onto an existing default burst panel. Rorona burst panel on auto presents another problem, since the AI won't item from on top of a burst panel. We'd need to item earlier and also can't use blue jelly to guarantee crit, which is extra bad on a stage that kills normal buffs. And so we're not actually using Rorona for the panel here, just the late turn that she dies before taking, and we'll have Wilbell drop a crit panel in front of the default burst panel, securing the crit for the Logi nuke. With the floor effect, Judy's evade is something like 20%, just roll that so she can survive to eat the knight's burst. Then Azana bursts to break and set the crit panel for Logi's S2 for the kill. It may not seem like much since it runs, well, automatically, but there's a huge distance from knowing what needs to be done to getting the AI to actually do it. And though if they ever decide to fix the items before burst thing, that would greatly simplify some of these sequences. I didn't fully appreciate the crit panel generation from Azana's burst before, but for situations where your main burst falls a bit short, it does provide a nice fallback for a skill 2 finish. GG. It's important to note that the buff reduction from the floor effect only applies to active buffs. The passive effects that aren't listed as visible entries under the in-combat status, like those from Memoria, gear, or character abilities, are exempt and apply normally. We have Bride Azana and Judy for the initiative setup, Wilbel for crit panels, Rorona for passive buffs and as a placeholder, and Logi as the DPS. Judy can carry passive buffs on top of tanking, through the free burst damage or Roman tournament memoria. Azana needs enough break to crack the knight in 2 AoEs, with a natural crit roll on the first and also 3 pieces of debuff gear, so she can get enough stacks on the knight without needing items. And the interesting thing for Logi is the item Charge Memoria. It sacrifices a lot of damage, but it's necessary for the item timing to get Logi the first burst and Azana the second. Items are just damage up debuffs. I don't have enough good copies of the newer / damage up, so it's just mix and match. /24 is the new counter stage variation. The Puni is the only one without the instant kill counter, and killing it will disable the counter on the others. Couldn't find a way to survive 4 enemy attacks without tripping counters, and then nuke the field all at once. But it turns out the solution was to thread 2 single-target attackers between the sheep and the Puni, with some tight speed tuning. They can each take out one of the mobs in one shot, cutting off the incoming attacks and leaving only the sheep to fend for itself. Rorona panel into defensive burst is pretty rare, but we just need it to block 1 round from the sheep to buy us the time needed to finish it off, since I couldn't find a way to get units onto the right panels sooner. And this is another case where on manual you could target the Puni anytime and maneuver onto the panels, and most of the struggle is in working around auto-targeting the next timeline unit. Another somewhat rare burst, since Rorona is usually setting the burst for someone else, but the all-resist down is actually useful sometimes for Roman tournament and such. Reuven is actually the main DPS for this over Logi, since he had the job of taking out the tankier golem. The guy's honestly a solid unit even outside of synthesis. Skill 2 with items and blue panel takes it. GG. The setup is pretty straightforward, with the hardest part being the speed tuning and the damage balance between the 2 attackers. Reuven needs a 0-speed accessory and a weapon with higher attack. Logi uses the one-time guaranteed crit weapon, cause he's not getting the /Rorona buff. Rorona needs to be slower than Liddy so that Liddy catches the Academy Rorona panel, but faster than Logi so that she can buff, and Logi can use items before his and Reuven's first attacks. The damage to off-attribute units has gotten quite high, so we're throwing some AoE defense on Liddy to keep her up. Liddy also needs to be slow enough that her defensive burst happens after the sheep's second attack, conserving the barrier for the third. /25 is the non-attacker DPS floor with minus 90% skill damage for attackers.
よーし始めよっか。
We're approaching it with Izana DPS and using the Firis Initiative setup so she positions ahead of all the adds after the initiative round, allowing her to delete them before they do damage. If you haven't seen my bride Izana coverage, her 200% break bonus on crits is substantial enough that she can contribute meaningful break even with damage gear. Together with Ryza, they crack all the small golems. Then Toturi cracks the slag, setting up Sophie to blue panel for Izana to trash sweep.
状況を見極めよう。今の私ならいける。負けないよ。ありがとう。力がパーン湧いてきた。使ってみよう。道具を使うよ。助かったよ。助かったよ。
Her free guaranteed crit from being on panels means we don't need to dedicate buffer or item slots towards crit rate. Quite convenient. The red panel prevents anyone from dying for now, and we need the single target hit to not land on Izana or Toturi so they can survive for the ending.
慎重にしよう。あれちょっぴり痛いかも。気をつけないと。今の私なら気合い入れていこう。ありがとう。
Rebreak the slag to align the Firis burst, the knockback securing another 2 panels for us before the slag wipes everyone except Izana and Toturi, vacating the burst panel for Izana.
私だってやってみせる。いつもより力が計算通りいくよ。はあ、この戦い負けられないよ。力
In this case, the solution to the panel alignment problem was to collapse the timeline order by letting most of the party get killed off. Gotta do what you gotta do.
こういうことができるよ。やー。力が湧いてきた。ちょっぴり痛い。
After that, we need enough break between Izana's burst and Toturi to break the slag yet again, allowing Izana to item onto the blue panel and finish it off.
元気出して。助かったよ。いい感じ。やるね。力がパーン湧いてきた。飛んで回ってすごい。おしとやかにされど力強くってね。
GG. There's some speed tuning with Firis needing to be slow, to extend the initiative round long enough for Izana to preempt all the broken enemies on her second turn. There's also some weird interaction where Sophie's speed affects whether Firis gets the burst panel ahead of the slag, even though she should have no effect on any of the initiative or other unit timings. A ton of break, debuff, and buff B gear, the requirements are quite high for the fast kill we need, with the off-attribute units lacking the durability for an extended fight. Having a breaker as our damage source also means we can't use the Liddy Masterpiece Memoria, one of the few times it would have helped to have the Izana fish one unlocked instead. /26 is a stage with 3 gimmicks, the main one being that you deal reduced damage when you have ailments, and normally the mushroom hits your party with AoE poison or something immediately. The other 2 are that you can't damage the bats until the mushroom dies, but they break really easily until they buff Reflect. With Firis Initiative, Izana breaks the bats instantly, and the Firis knockback lets Logi take a second swing to take out the mushroom before it does anything.
よし、これならなんとかするさ。
私の出番よっ。
こんな状態じゃ徹底的にやってやるさ。
力がパーン。
I tried getting enough damage on Azana for her to clean up the bats immediately after, but it wasn't happening with what I have available, so just left it for Logi and Reuven to handle.
行くぜ、全力全開だ。よし、これ徹底的にやってやるさ。
すっごいことができるよ。やー。
At this point, it's checkmate, and no matter who dies, the others will finish up. But you may need to roll specific targeting on the single target hits if your characters aren't quite as strong.
いつもこれならいいんだけどな。
GG. There's nothing special for the setup, just need 2 sets of decent attacker gear, and then it's the usual speed tuning and timing. I have damage gear on Azana also from trying to sweep the bats, but it's probably not necessary. Slash 27 features the standard red Punis gimmick, with them triggering buffs and debuffs upon death. We're running the usual Firis Initiative setup, breaking all the Punis with Azana and then sweeping them before they recover with Rorona panel into Logi nuke. As usual, we're tight on character slots, so we're getting crit chance from Soup, but I'll take rolling the crits over dealing with the action RNG on the 4 Punis. The Ghost's second attack is random. We'll roll for the single target version so it only takes out Judy, leaving the rest of the party to beat it up. There's another stray single target hit in there. Think it doesn't matter as long as Logi doesn't die. Could maybe optimize this stretch a bit. Didn't think it's worth the extra effort, so I'll take the somewhat slower clear.
立て直そう。
助かった。
これを。助かったよ。力がパーン湧いてきた。シンクのハンマーが敵を撃つ。こういう時アンベルさんなら
大丈夫かな。準備 OK だよ。なんか違う。まあこれはこれで
いつもより力が出せた。狙いは外さない。やあそりゃ。
こんな状態じゃ徹底的にやってやるぞ。
やるじゃん。
はあ、無事に終わったな。
GG. The break required to get all the Puni before they do anything is quite high. Other than that, it's the usual initiative, speed tuning, and all that. I wasn't able to one-shot the ghost along with everything else with any item loadout, so double soup gives decent crit chance over several hits. /28 is the new ailment floor, now generic instead of specifically poison or paralysis, with afflicted targets taking double damage. And it's damn weasels again. We need to roll for the big one's AoE as its first move. This allows Linka to survive to tank the second small one also. Even with the better AoE ailment items now, the RNG for 3 targets is still a bit annoying, and we want to throw as late as possible, after the side weasels take their turns, so the paralysis doesn't wear off before Logi can nuke. Linka is sacrificed for the panel order. We're using her over Patty specifically to delay the items, and to have her die as intended. After that, if you manage to hit the ailment rolls, Logi just deletes the field. GG. For the speed tuning, Logi needs to be 4th to end up on the burst panel, so Rorona needs to be really slow, which might require a Memoria not at max level. With the item timing in turn order, Izana and Ryza would use up debuffs before Loji's turn, so we're using doctrines for once. /29 is the new duo floor, similar to the old bird plus knight but with the individual quirks being slightly more annoying. The beast gains debuff immunity and the bird applies multiple stacks of evade, these alternative approaches to defense making it hard to deal with both at once. For slash comps, the debuff block is probably the harder one to deal with, since we can tick down the evasion with patty counters, breaker AoEs or items, and Loji Burst will ultimately bypass the dodge anyway. The first counter cleared one stack, and we clear the second with an item allowing the breakers to break both enemies and claim the burst panel for Loji. Both are a bit tanky and survive, so there's some action RNG to make sure Patty takes the hits and nobody dies. The second burst eliminates the bird. Then we're lined up for Ryza to force break and Loji to kill from on top of the blue panel. I don't think anyone is in danger, regardless of what attacks the beast does. GG. And this may have been the first proper all-slash-party we ran. It's just a longer fight that we couldn't steamroll, and so requires a bit more durability. Patty needs speed to set up her counter ahead of any attacks, and the incoming damage is high enough that she's packing full all-target defense also. There's some speed and turn order adjustment to make sure the attack item clears the evasion ahead of our breakers. This requires Rorona to be slower than the bird, since the two counters from Patty will mean items are already up. And we're using a healing item for once, since we actually need everyone alive this time for the panels to work out. And that brings us finally to the last floor, floor 30 being the only one with unique patterns exclusive to each tower. The gimmick for the slash version is that enemies start with baseline damage reduction, but gain stacks of increased damage received debuffs when hit with crits, forcing you to smack them a bunch before they start taking real damage. It's a two-wave affair, with the first being just some filler enemies, but this makes it a bit rough to time our items, which you'd usually want access to at the start of the second wave. On top of that, Val kills slow, one target at a time, and Patty's counters further accelerate the cooldown, but we do need her to deal with the rather high incoming damage. We're looking for specific enemy attacks after they re-roll from breaking to conserve HP for the second wave, though we also line up some Rorona bursts for party healing. The first round of items allows Val to take out 2 enemies with just skill 2s. And these Rorona bursts are pretty important for refueling Patty. Without them, Rorona's single target heals would target Val because of the buff and leave her neglected. Our second and last item usage is precisely timed to put Val on the burst for the Wave 1 clear. The crit buff will carry over, allowing us to proc the damage up gimmick, and we'll just have to trust that Val can finish up. Wave 2 of the floor 30s open with a bang, and the AoEs will generally kill any off-attribute units, even with extremely high damage reduction, forcing you to run an all/comp, though you wouldn't know it without failing a bit. And the baseline damage reduction is 50%. It's gonna take a few hits to even get to normal damage dealt, so it's sort of an endurance battle. It helps that the slag is quite slow and we've lined up the dragon to take the red panels. Working out the timeline this deep is really a pain. But we do eventually get the Ryza burst to re-break the dragon after it recovers, setting Val up to burst for the kill, and then the slag is too slow to be a threat.
動き見切れるかしら。リラさんの教え通りにそろそろ仕上げていきましょう。受け止めて。はあ、さようなら。
Another Val burst closes it out shortly after.
ちょっと痛いかも。いつもより力が出せそう。計算通りいくよ。はあ、チャンスだね。すっごく真心込めてます。助かったわ。そろそろ仕上げていきましょう。受け止めて。はあ、いい感じね。次に進みましょう。
GG. The setup again revolves mostly around speed tuning. Patty in the 5th spot gives Rorona the burst panels in the first wave, and Rorona needs to not get them in the second wave so that she can do her job buffing crit properly. Azana, coming out of initiative, needs to be in the 2nd position to give Ryza that wave 2 burst and to conserve Ryza's debuff for Logi's attacks. We're relying on a single soup and some luck to stack the gimmick in the 2nd wave, and the powders pump Val's various normal hits, with many of the burst panels not going to her. And that's all, folks, the end, Finn. If you've made it this far, hope you were amused or entertained or inspired. Let me know what you think. I'll be putting up the other towers soon, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.